All set? Good afternoon. My name is Preet Bharara, and I am the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Today, I am here to announce the findings and recommendations of a 2-year civil rights investigation into the treatment of adolescent males at Rikers Island. Those between the ages of 16 and 18, most of whom have not yet been convicted of a crime, and about half of whom have been diagnosed with a mental illness. The bottom line conclusion is this: there is a pattern and practice of conduct at Rikers Island that violates the constitutional rights of adolescents. According to our investigation, for adolescent inmates, Rikers Island is broken. It is a place where brute force is the first impulse rather than the last resort, a place where verbal insults are repaid with physical injuries, where beatings are routine while accountability is rare, where a culture of violence endures even while a code of silence prevails. Now let me say one thing right at the outset. We do not issue these findings lightly. The job of a corrections officer is incredibly difficult. It requires strength and dedication and maturity, as well as physical and mental courage. And most perform their difficult mission admirably and with honor. But something is very wrong at Rikers, and reform is long overdue. Behind bars does not mean beyond the Constitution. Just as law enforcement has to ensure that criminals are held accountable and punished appropriately, so must law enforcement guarantee that an individual's fundamental constitutional rights are safeguarded while in custody. To be clear, we have not commenced a legal action today, but will not hesitate to do so in the future if necessary. As required by federal statute, we must notify the city of our findings prior to filing a federal lawsuit. And so today we have started the statutory clock by sending to the mayor, the Department of Correction Commissioner, and Corporation Counsel a detailed 79-page report outlining our findings, as well as a host of remedial measures we believe must be implemented to safeguard the constitutional rights of adolescents who are in city custody. We urge the city to take the report seriously and to act with speed. Now, let me describe the Rikers report in some more detail. Our investigation focused on 3 principal areas: the use of force by staff, inmate-on-inmate violence, and the use of punitive segregation. We looked specifically at the time period of 2011 to 2013, which I emphasize was before the current Commissioner, Joseph Pont, took office. So Commissioner Pont did not create this culture, but it is his responsibility now. So what did we find? We found there is a culture of violence that pervades the adolescent facilities at Rikers Island. The use of force against adolescents is alarming, to say the least. As our Rikers report describes, there is a clear culture of force first. The chart to my right paints an ugly statistical picture, which is undoubtedly incomplete, as incidents often go unreported, and correction staff pressure inmates not to report incidents, using the widespread phrase, "hold it down." If you look at just some of the stats taken from page 8 of the report, Rikers is a dangerous place for adolescents, and a pervasive climate of fear exists, according to our report. One of the most startling statistics is that of the 708 adolescent males in custody as of October 30th of 2012, 43.7% of them had been subjected to use of force by staff at least once. In 2013, there were 565 reported staff use of force incidents, resulting in 1,057 injuries. In 2013 again, there were 845 inmate-on-inmate fights at Rikers, and in 1 year, adolescents sustained a total of 239 head injuries, and I'll have more to say about that in a moment. There were 96 suspected fractures, and on a typical day, 15 to 25% of the adolescent population was in punitive segregation. In 2013 also, adolescents required emergency medical services 459 times. As we say in the report, it's not just that these statistics are startling and unfortunate, but we made a series of findings as well, as summarized a little bit on this chart further to my right. There is a pattern and practice of conduct at Rikers that violates the constitutional rights of adolescent inmates. We are talking about a culture problem and a systemic problem, not an individualized issue here. As I mentioned, force is used against adolescents at an alarming rate. Failure to prevent violent inmate-on-inmate fights is a continuing systemic problem. Corrections officers, according to our report and investigation, too frequently resort to headshots. Those are shots to the head and face of adolescents, often with the use of a closed fist, and often not to achieve any legitimate purpose, but to punish and to act in retribution. As I said, force used as punishment or retribution. Force often used in response to verbal altercations with officers. Corrections officers attempting to justify, with respect to later investigations, their use of force by yelling out loud so others can hear, stop resisting, even in cases where the evidence shows the adolescent had been completely subdued. We find in case after case after case, as outlined in our report, that use of force was particularly common and disproportionately common in areas without video surveillance, and we have recommendations on that, which I'll get to in a moment also. Inadequate and even false reporting by staff on the use of force, and in some ways among the most troubling things, a powerful code of silence which prevents staff who witness force from reporting and reforming the problem. Now, I want to spend another minute on that last point, the powerful code of silence. There exists an unfortunate culture in which staff seem to get away with inaccurately reporting use of force incidents. We saw, as outlined in the report, several cases in which the medical records and the reported injuries just didn't match up with officers' accounts and incidents where staff reports were inconsistent with actual video surveillance. What's more, the Department of Correction fails to conduct timely and thorough investigations of use of force incidents. The Department of Correction, according to the report, fails to adequately discipline staff for using unnecessary force against adolescents. I'll give you one example. We identified one corrections officer who was involved in 76 incidents during a 6-year period, but who was disciplined only once and was permitted to continue to work in the adolescent housing areas. What's more than that, even, the Department of Correction fails to provide corrections officers with adequate use of force training. Most new officers' first assignment is where most adolescents are housed, and these new officers are simply ill-equipped to cope with adolescents who often suffer from a wide range of mental illnesses and behavioral disorders. As a result, these officers quickly resort to using violence as a means to control adolescents. Let me elaborate further on another point that I mentioned at the outset, the use of punitive segregation. We found that adolescents charged with committing rule violations, including nonviolent infractions, are routinely placed in what amounts to solitary confinement for weeks and sometimes months at a time. As I mentioned, and as reflected in one of the charts over there, in 2013, on any given day, 15 to 25% of the adolescent population was in punitive segregation, often for nonviolent conduct. And although the department implemented certain reforms in late 2013, according to census data for December 16, 2013, dozens of adolescents in punitive segregation that day had been given that segregation sentence of 60 days or more. This is, of course, of even greater concern given the significant psychological, physical, and developmental harm for youth with disabilities and histories of trauma and abuse who make up a significant proportion of the Rikers adolescent population. And so, as a result of all this investigation and scrutiny, we have come up with a number of recommendations. In our view, the department, under its new leadership, needs to promptly implement systemic reforms to address the constitutional violations that we outlined in our report. We have therefore proposed the following systemic changes, some of which are outlined in the report on the chart to my left. 1, house adolescents in a jail not located on Rikers Island, staffed by officers trained and experienced in handling adolescents. 2, increase video surveillance, including in the classroom areas and clinics, so that inmates cannot be dragged into areas with no video cameras just to be beaten, something that we saw time and time again in our investigation. 3, strengthen use of force policies, ensuring all officers and supervisors understand when the use of force is warranted and when it is not. 4, strengthen reporting requirements, including a zero-tolerance policy for the failure to submit complete, accurate, and prompt reports. Part of the problem in our investigation was that there wasn't sufficient reporting, and the files were lacking. 5, drastically improve the quality and timeliness of use of force investigations and hold staff accountable for biased or incomplete investigations. 6, ensure that inmates are adequately supervised, that vulnerable inmates are transferred when necessary, and that inmates receive prompt medical care after any use of force by staff. 7, develop comprehensive training programs. Training is a big problem on Rikers Island, as we noted. Training programs on use of force policies and defensive tactics and on conflict resolution and crisis intervention. 8, ensure that staff face appropriate and meaningful discipline for any violation of use of force policies and procedures, including developing categories of misconduct that will result in officers actually being terminated when warranted. 9, develop a continuum of alternative disciplinary sanctions that do not involve lengthy periods of isolation and that can actually reward good behavior by inmates. There are many more recommendations with much greater specificity outlined in the report. In all, we have proposed more than 70 concrete recommendations to help fix Rikers Island. Now, we recognize that the Department of Corrections' new leadership inherited this crisis. But in the strongest terms, I urge the city to take these recommendations seriously, and I am glad that its leadership has given every indication that the city will. As our investigation has shown, Rikers Island is a broken institution for adolescents. And a broken institution will produce broken people, especially when they are young and fragile with mental illness, as so many of them are. The adolescents in Rikers are walled off from the public, but they are not walled off from the Constitution. Indeed, most of these young men are pretrial detainees, presumed innocent until proven guilty. But whether they are pretrial or convicted, they are entitled to be detained safely and in accordance with their constitutional rights, not consigned to a corrections crucible that seems more inspired by Lord of the Flies than any legitimate philosophy of humane detention. These young men, automatically prosecuted as adults despite their age under New York law, may be on an island and out of sight, but they can no longer remain out of mind. The rule of law applies to everyone, not only to adolescent criminal defendants, but also to adult corrections officers. And if there's one thing that history teaches, it is that violence begets violence. And the culture of arbitrary violence at Rikers must come to an end. And by the way, the cost of a broken Rikers Island is borne by all of us, because the cost of that culture is the sum of the incalculable expense of an unchecked cycle of violence, of increased recidivism, of emergency and long-term medical treatment, of legitimate lawsuits that the city must settle, and of a loss of faith and confidence in our criminal justice system as a whole. That cost is too much for all of us to bear any longer, especially when there are sensible solutions on the table. And so I hope there is a will towards change. I want to thank and recognize the dedicated prosecutors and paralegals in my office for their really outstanding, thorough, and meticulous work in bringing these findings to light. The Assistant U.S. Attorneys are Emily Daughtry, Deputy Chief Appellate Attorney, Jeffrey Powell, Lara Eshkenazi, Deputy Chief of the Civil Rights Unit, David Kennedy, Chief of the Civil Rights Unit, and Sarah Shadovsky, Chief of the Civil Division. The paralegals are Tammy Yin and Jamie Tovar, and they should all be congratulated, and we should all be pleased that they have devoted so much of their time and effort to bringing this information to light. Happy to answer your questions. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about how this all started and what kind of access your attorneys were given, not just the documents, but to actually interview inmates or people who used to be inmates?
Yeah. What I can say is that I think around 2.5 years ago, or maybe a little longer than that, information came to us from more than one source that there was a problem on Rikers Island. But, people have been paying attention to what's been going on Rikers Island for a while. There has been a culture of violence with respect to the adult population for a long time. And so we decided that the Civil Rights Unit in our office should take a look with respect to your question about what they did, it's outlined, I think, in great detail in the report. They conducted interviews along with our retained expert of a number of inmates. They interviewed health officials. They reviewed documents. They talked to corrections officials also. Obviously, weren't able to talk to everyone. I think they focused on 200 use of force incidents as a base, which is quite a lot, although not all of them, to get a sense of what was going on there and from which to draw inferences and from which to propose recommendations. Yeah.
If you found a pattern in practice, which is usually a preamble to filing a civil suit, why didn't you file a civil suit in this case?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my remarks, the statute requires that we give notice and an opportunity for the city to respond. And so when I mentioned that by today's issuance of the letter to the city, we started the statutory clock, they have 49 days, and I assume it won't take that long, but they have 49 days to consider what we have proposed and to think about the findings and to meet with us and discuss with us, and depending on what the reaction is, and again, I am optimistic that the reaction will be a good one because there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of things said publicly by the mayor and others to indicate that they want reform also. But during that 49 days, we will meet and discuss and see what makes sense thereafter. Yeah.
Has there been, did you find any video surveillance or security cameras there, and what will you find?
There is a lot of video surveillance, and one bit of good news I think I should pass along is during the pendency of our investigation, video surveillance was increased, and the number of cameras was increased. As we lay out in our report, it's not sufficient because there are still, there's still black holes and there's still blind spots where people can be beaten in what we describe as for inappropriate reasons. In some cases, we had video that should have been available that wasn't available and disappeared mysteriously. And as we also outlined in the report, with respect to video that did exist, part of the basis for the findings is that you would have reports from officers and from other employees saying that something went down a particular way, and the video contradicted that. But so there's a contradiction between what happened and what's on the video, and there's also an absence of video.
Sir, so you said this happened in the previous administration. Are you laying the blame at the former corrections commissioner?
I'm not laying the blame at anyone's feet. What I'm saying is there has been a culture of violence and a problem at Rikers with respect to adolescents for a very long time. And what I am saying is the people who are now in charge inherited that. And they may not have been the cause of the problem, but it's their responsibility now. And this is not about, the point of this is not to assign blame, but to fix the problem.
The former commissioner now has a high-ranking position in the Connecticut State Police. Do you have any concerns given your findings here that you have such a high law enforcement position at this time?
I'm not going to comment on who did what before. I think the findings speak for themselves, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Regarding the Moreland Commission, has Larry Schwartz agreed to meet with your office?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on anything other than what we're talking about here today, which is the Rikers report. Disappointing many of you. Yeah.
You had a chance to share the findings already with the Department of Corrections of the city.
Yeah, as I said this morning, we provided copies to all the appropriate people and notified them, and look forward to meeting with them soon. I think it's too early to say what the reaction has been, but as I've said a number of times, I am optimistic, and the team is optimistic, given the kinds of things that have been coming out of the mouths of people who care about this issue. I mean, obviously, there are issues beyond the adolescent population at Rikers, and the papers are full of stories, with respect to the adults, and we have a criminal case pending against someone who is an employee at Rikers. So I think there's a lot to be done. This is the beginning of the next phase of trying to reform Rikers Island, and I hope and expect that we will get a positive response. Yeah.
What was the attitude of correction officers upon seeing this investigation, upon hearing that you guys were looking at this and about the findings? It sounds as if they're arguably part of the problem.
Yeah, can I repeat something I said at the beginning? There's no allegation that every corrections officer is doing a bad job. It is a really, really hard job. And the population we're talking about is a difficult population, given some of their tendencies to violence, given mental illness on the part of, I think, according to our report, 51% of them. So it's a really, really hard job. And most people do it well, but there's a problem with respect to others who don't. And some of that is even not all to be laid at their feet, because there's a problem of training, there's a problem of culture, there's a problem of supervision. It's not easy to walk into a job if you haven't been shown how to do so and deal with an intransigent, potentially mentally ill and violent 16-year-old and figure out how to deal in a way that doesn't continue a cycle of violence at the prison. So I think on the part, as you might imagine in any case, that the reaction of some is, it's about time that everyone gets on the same page, and the reaction from others is one of denial. That's speculation on my part. But part of the reason we're doing this, by the way, is not just to cast aspersions on a subset of corrections officers and supervisors and managers who could be doing a better job. It's also for their own protection. Because when you have a cycle of violence, as is described in something, you should read the appendix to the report, and it goes into some of these incidents in a little bit of detail. We want to make sure that it's safe for everyone, not just for the inmates, and not just to protect the constitutional rights of the inmates, but if you get a volatile situation with this kind of culture and cycle that I've been describing, and it's described in more detail in the report, that's more dangerous for every corrections officer who works at that site. And so I think, the reactions are varied, but hopefully the overwhelming reaction, once we get some of these things implemented, will be exceptionally positive. Yeah.
Were there any correctional officers that were dismissed during the course of your investigation? Additionally, how close was your team at any point to identifying potential charges being filed against the correctional officers?
I don't remember if there were 0 or very few who were disciplined. That's in the report. We can find the page for you if you don't want to read the whole thing. With respect to criminal charges, our bread and butter in this office is bringing individual charges against people and holding them accountable when it's appropriate. Today is about talking about systemic change and systemic problems and wide-ranging proposals to make sure that the problem at Rikers is fixed, and it's about prevention, more so than accountability. But we always look carefully at allegations of misconduct on the part of particular people. And we have met with the Bronx DA's office because as an initial matter, this is the kind of case that often is brought by the Bronx DA's office. We have been in close communication with them, and members of this team have been meeting with assistant district attorneys at the Bronx DA's office to see if it makes sense to take a look at some of the cases that they're looking at, and if they're people to be prosecuted rather than described in the report, then we'll do that. Also bear in mind, they're not the easiest cases in the world to bring, because in some of the cases, you have the word of an inmate, a charged person, or convicted person, against the word of a corrections officer. As I mentioned, in some of these cases, there's an absence of video or destroyed video. There's an absence of paperwork. But it is important to us not just to talk about overall systemic change and reform and addressing the culture, but also to hold individuals accountable as well when it's appropriate to do so. Yeah.
Quick questions. What was the scale of the missing videos? About how many times did you see this happening? And the second question, unrelated, I see the ninth recommendation is prohibiting solitary confinement for adolescents with mental health disorders. What about, why not go further and say no solitary confinement for adolescents, period, given what we know about solitary confinement and mental health?
Yeah, the second question, I'll just rely on what we have in our report. I think that, very astute people who have taken a look at this, and our expert who has literally been involved in monitoring and investigating and scrutinizing scores, if not hundreds, of facilities and detention facilities and institutions, thought this made sense. It's not an unreasonable question you asked, but at this point, this is what we're proposing. With respect to your first question on how much video is missing, I believe in the report we recite that in all the cases where video seems to have been available, in other words, where there was a camera, about 30% of the time there was no actual video to be seen. Yeah. You again?
I was wondering, in the course of your conversation, you said you compared the conditions at Rikers to void of the flies. I wonder why it's been expanded.
I mean, it's a colorful phrase to talk about, to bring to light the fact that you have these young people who are, in some ways, it's been a while since I read the book, my recollection is, you didn't have real rules and you didn't have real principles, and you had a culture of violence and mano a mano. Part of the problem that maybe didn't get as much attention as the use of force by staff against inmates is inmate on inmate violence, and it's part of the responsibility, which is a little bit more reminiscent of Lord of the Flies. It's part of the responsibility of the institution to figure out ways to lessen the amount of inmate on inmate violence. And obviously, something that people should appreciate is, it's a detention facility. It's not a nirvana. And bad things happen at places like that. And we have an MCC here, and the Eastern District of New York has an MDC, and there are detention facilities all over the country, some of which contain adolescents and most of which contain adults. But the level of violence, of inmate-on-inmate violence, and the level of use of force that we saw at Rikers, in the words of our consultant, our expert, was more than he had ever seen at any other place. And so this is in a higher order level than we have seen elsewhere. We're not at that point yet. As I said, this is sort of the beginning of the next phase. We completed our investigation. We issued our findings to the relevant authorities, including the mayor and the Department of Correction, and we'll wait and see how we'll ultimately implement these recommendations. Hopefully we will not have to file suit, and we'll reach some kind of understanding and resolution. Sometimes as a part of that, there's the imposition of a monitor, but I think it's premature. Right?
Provide some clarification on the Moreland matter, specifically the reports this past week that your office was concerned that the governor's office engaged in witness tampering, and can you provide some clarification on that?
No. Thank you.